The machine. How NASA built an economy overnight. Great speeches don't pour concrete. Contracts do, and contracts need homes. NASA didn't grow as one big fortress. It sprouted a constellation of centers, each one a job engine, each one a political anchor. Houston's Manned Spacecraft Center took mission operations and crew systems. Huntsville's Marshall handled rockets and test stands the size of cathedrals. Cape Canaveral, soon Kennedy, became the stage. Langley and Lewis, later Glenn, kept aerodynamics and propulsion research honest. JPL in Pasadena guarded deep space craft and data brains. The map looked technical. It was also a ledger of payrolls. That network did two things at once. It spread risk across specialties, and it spread benefits across states. You could sell a tight budget to one committee, but try cutting thousands of aerospace jobs across 6 swing states at once. That wasn't an accident. NASA's center directors became local celebrities, ribbon cutters-in-chief. Chambers of commerce built brochures around them. University presidents tailored departments to feed them. The machine learned to feed itself. Meanwhile, NASA adopted a prime contractor model because building a moon rocket is not a mom-and-pop operation. North American Aviation took the command and service module. Grumman landed the lunar lander. Boeing, Douglas, and IBM carved up Saturn stages and guidance. Each prime became a city-state with its own subcontractor web, 20,000 suppliers at peak, 400,000 people touched by the payslips and the schedule boards. Engineering problems turned into line items. Line items turned into mortgages and car payments. Workshare politics seeped into engineering choices. You can hear it in meeting notes. Distribute avionics work to balance regional participation. Translation: share the pie without breaking the rocket. Hardware moved to where votes lived, and so did test rigs, a weld fixture in Louisiana, a machine shop in upstate New York, a cable harness plant in Ohio. Every distribution list had a congressman attached. Here's where it gets crazy. The paperwork was propulsion. Source selections, RFPs, change orders, configuration control, the vocabulary of acceleration. Schedules collapsed as offices learned to approve in parallel. Program managers joked that the only thing faster than a Saturn V was a funding obligation at fiscal year end. Rocket science powered by paperwork. Numbers tell the arc. NASA's budget climbed from rounding error to roughly 4% of GDP at peak. Counties around Houston, the Space Coast, and Southern California posted double-digit jumps in high-wage employment. Real estate developers followed the contracts. New subdivisions appeared with street names like Gemini, Titan, Lunar. School districts hired math teachers they couldn't find 5 years earlier. The Apollo curve wasn't abstract. It was traffic at 7 a.m. Inside factories, the scale felt personal. A machinist in Downey learned to hold tolerances he'd never imagined. A young programmer at IBM punched Fortran into cards for a guidance computer that couldn't fail. A quality inspector in Bethpage taped a photo of his kids inside his locker and counted rivets because missing one could cost someone their father. Micro-stories like these stitched the big myth to everyday life. NASA's decentralized model let expertise travel. A heat shield issue in California, fly 3 engineers from Langley plus a materials specialist from Cleveland. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Universities retooled. Grants flowed into control theory, materials science, human factors. New labs took shape in basements and borrowed hangars. Graduate cohorts formed around data from wind tunnels and transient tests. The pipeline from lecture hall to cleanroom shortened to month. To keep the machine fed, NASA standardized the way it bought things. Performance specs replaced blueprints where possible. Let industry innovate as long as the box performs. Then audit the tests hard. That meant armies of vendor reps, resident inspectors, and traveling review boards. People who used to stamp airframes now stamped flowcharts. The cultural export wasn't just technology. It was systems engineering. Write the requirements, trace them, test them, and never trust a single-point failure. What nobody knew at the time was how much politics shaped the calendar. Launch windows were physics, test windows were appropriations. A slipped milestone in June could become a hearing in July. Program managers learned to translate, a risk matrix for the engineers, a district map for the staffers. If money was fuel, politics was the guidance. Meanwhile, across town in every city with a NASA badge, small businesses learned the rhythm. Machine shops invested in new mills because a prime promised 3 years of work. Cafeterias expanded because the second shift kept eating at midnight. A parts washer with a 12-hour cycle became the critical path on a Tuesday. It sounds small until that washer delays a harness, that harness delays a test, and a test delay turns into a Saturday vote tally. The subcontractor spiderweb made resilience and fragility the same thing. One factory strike in California could stall an assembly in Florida. A rejected lot of fasteners in Connecticut could idle a high bay in Houston. NASA responded by building redundancy into people, not just parts, qualified alternates, second-source vendors, cross-trained teams. The economy was learning how to be precise at scale, and through all of it, the machine paid in more than wages. It left behind metrology labs, software habits, cleanroom standards, and a workforce that expected checklists for breakfast. The centers didn't just absorb money, they converted it into muscle memory. That's how you build an economy overnight. You teach thousands of people how to solve impossible problems on a schedule, then you do it again on Monday. The rules: procurement, cost plus, and guaranteed profit. If money was fuel, the rules were the pump. NASA didn't buy rockets like cars. It wrote requirements, not recipes, then paid companies to figure out how to meet them. The preferred instrument was the cost plus award fee contract. You bring your actual costs, add a guaranteed percentage for profit, then chase a bonus if the customer thinks you performed well. The incentive isn't to cut costs. It's to keep the schedule moving and avoid visible failure. That's how you light a fire under industry, by protecting margins and punishing public embarrassment, not overruns. Schedule pressure was a budget accelerator. Kennedy's end-of-decade clock made time the one variable you couldn't stretch, so everything else had to give. If a weld failed in a stress test, you didn't pause to redesign for 6 months. You ran parallel paths, placed long lead orders twice, and let the bill land later. Cost plus made that rational. A fixed-price contractor would have gone broke trying to chase changing requirements on a lunar deadline. With Cost Plus, the model absorbed chaos and converted it into hours, headcount, and invoices. Source selection sounded clinical panels, scoring rubrics, site visits, but politics breathed through the vents. Technical merit lived next to management capability and past performance, categories elastic enough to invite lobbying. Executives walked NASA teams past spotless labs and polished schedules, while congressional delegations toured shop floors on Fridays. A good plant tour could help a borderline proposal cross the line. And once a prime one, the workshare conversation turned into geography. Spread the subcontracts, keep peace on the hill, don't strand a committee chair with an empty factory. IBM's guidance computer deal showed the logic. NASA didn't pick the cheapest bidder, it picked the firm that could deliver disciplined software and hardware integration at scale, then paid to teach an entire generation how to do it under audits. That discipline cost money: formal specs, version control, test harnesses, redundancy. Under Cost Plus, those costs were investments, then reimbursable. The reward wasn't just a computer that worked. It was a standard for how to build complex systems under pressure, exported everywhere. Grumman's lunar module told the other half of the story. A featherweight lander kept getting heavier. Every new safety fix added mass, every kilogram added redesigns upstream. Weight spiraled, cost followed. Under fixed price, the company might have eaten the difference or cut corners. Under Cost Plus, the redesigns marched through change orders and configuration boards, and the checkbook tracked the physics. Weight is money wasn't a metaphor, it was an invoice line. The result was a balance most taxpayers never saw: privatized upside, socialized risk. If a breakthrough cut weeks off a schedule, the prime met milestones and earned award fees. If a late surprise demanded a new test rig, the government paid to build it. The calculus made sense if your enemy was burning rubles to keep up. It felt different if your mortgage payment depended on an honest budget. The stakes were simple. Your money moved at the speed of urgency, while oversight tried to sprint in dress shoes. Schedule was the master narrative. Reviews stacked like dominoes: preliminary design, critical design, qualification, acceptance. Miss one and a hearing appeared. Program managers learned to speak 2 languages at once. In the morning, failure modes, fault trees, burn down charts. In the afternoon, jobs in Harris County, test stands in Mississippi, suppliers in upstate New York. The same slide deck could justify a risk buy-down and a ribbon cutting. The rules demanded it. Lobbying didn't need smoke-filled rooms, it needed calendars. A senator's staffer asked how many suppliers in their state worked the guidance line. A governor wanted to know if a tooling contract could swing to a struggling town near an election. NASA had to manage the line between technical need and political gravity. Sometimes the line bent. A hardware lot moved to a qualified second source, which also happened to be in a different district. The engineering paperwork explained redundancy. The map explained votes. Quality assurance became theater with teeth. Resident inspectors in factory bays signed off on torque values and solder joints, while auditors traced requirements through binders. Under Cost Plus, documentation wasn't overhead, it was billable. That sounds cynical until you remember Apollo 1. After the fire, paperwork saved lives, flammability standards, wiring separation rules, hatch egress specs. The same rulebook that padded costs in peacetime cut risk when it mattered. There was friction everywhere. Small shops learned that a late form could hold up payment for weeks. Primes learned that a missed metric could shave their award fee. NASA learned that a contractor's percentage complete could be a mood. Meanwhile, something else was happening. The system taught people to think in interfaces, not parts. When money flows through interfaces, you learn to define them, protect them, and test them into submission. Was there waste? Sure. Duplication, rework, tooling scrapped after 3 flights, facilities oversized for a peak that came and went. But embedded in that waste were permanent upgrades, metrology equipment in towns that never had it, clean rooms that would host the next generation of instruments, a procurement workforce that knew how to herd complexity. The rules guaranteed profit, but they also guaranteed capacity. In a Cold War that measured strength in factories and fabs, that guarantee was part of the point. By the end of the decade, Cost Plus had written a new normal. Contractors expected the government to carry risk on frontier projects. Politicians expected the money to land where the flags would fly. NASA expected to arbitrate between physics and pork and still hit the window. It wasn't pretty. It was effective enough to land 3 men on the moon and beam the receipt into every living room. The map, congressional pork, and the geography of space. While engineers argued over valves, the real map got drawn in committee rooms. District by district, the space program became visible not as a line to the moon, but as a lattice of payrolls. Appropriators didn't move numbers, they moved factories, and those factories anchored votes. Start with the committees. Appropriations held the purse, armed services held the industrial base, and NASA oversight kept the cameras pointed at national goals. Hearings did double duty, technical theater up front, district signaling in the footnotes. A witness would describe a test stand failure, and a member would ask, almost casually, which suppliers in their state were providing the fix. The subtext wasn't subtle. Show me why this money belongs at home. District mapping turned into a quiet craft. Program offices kept charts, color-coded spreads of prime and subcontract award locations. A proposal wasn't just rated on merit, it was checked against political geometry. If a high bay in California was heavy this quarter, a harness line might open in Ohio the next. When Louisiana landed Saturn stage work in Michoud, it wasn't pure coincidence. Water access, yes, but also a senator who could secure a floor vote when a milestone slipped. Hearings ran like pageants. Cameras framed astronauts and crisp line drawings, but the cast list told the story. Union reps, Chamber of Commerce leaders, university deans, mayors with podium smiles. Testimony about workforce training flowed into questions about community impact. How many jobs are we talking about in my district by Q3? The answer always came with a number and an invitation to a ribbon cutting. Votes arrived with the scissors. Saturn V factories became landmarks. In Huntsville, test stands towered like cathedrals over a town that learned to count in kilonewtons. In New Orleans, tank sections rolled past neighborhoods that smelled of coffee and welding flux. In Southern California, subcontractors stretched from El Segundo to the valley, where aerospace suburbs sprouted cul-de-sacs named for constellations. Swing states didn't just watch launches, they assembled them. Local media did the heavy lifting. Newspaper inserts ran profiles of machinists whose kids wore future astronaut shirts. Radio spots talked about scholarships funded by a contractor's charitable arm. A school board touted new physics labs thanks to NASA partnerships. Civic pride wrapped the pork like a flag. If anyone asked whether a fixture could have been built cheaper somewhere else, the evening news cut to B-roll of workers in hairnets and the question dissolved. Meanwhile, unknown to them, across town, procurement officers massaged workshare. A reliability issue on a guidance harness presented 2 solutions, redesign or dual source. Dual source meant spreading risk. It also meant spreading orders. Upstate New York saw new overtime. A member's office received a briefing packet with glossy photos and a 1-page economic impact sheet. The next markup got strangely smoother. Committee power concentrated outcomes. Seniority on appropriations could turn a shaky test site into a national asset. A call from armed services could frame a facility as dual use, threading the needle between civilian space and defense readiness. The language mattered. National capability got funded. Local pilot project did not. Staffers trained in the syntax. There were red lines. Move too much work to please a coalition, and the interfaces multiplied. More interfaces meant more failure modes. Program managers pushed back with charts showing risk curves exploding past safe limits. The compromise was choreography. Keep critical paths tight, avionics, propulsion, crew systems, then sprinkle peripheral work where it bought peace. A thermal blanket shop here, a non-destructive testing lab there. Enough to claim a win without touching the engine room. From their perspective, small towns learned a new economic weather report. A review in Washington could mean a hiring freeze. An authorization passed meant a second shift. City councils timed infrastructure bonds to contract options. Realtors tracked award announcements like sports scores. One canceled tooling order rippled into a strip mall that never broke ground. The votes followed. Members who defended NASA in lean years got mailers back home with photos at the Cape, hard hats on, sunsets over the crawlerway. Opponents found themselves outflanked by chambers warning of layoffs and by school principals holding up STEM grants. The geography of space hardened into a coalition. Gulf Coast welders, Midwestern machinists, California coders, New England materials scientists, all paid by the same line item. Yet the map wasn't static. After Apollo 1, oversight sharpened. Site visits turned colder. A senator walked a factory floor and saw flammable foam residues and chewed wiring. The next week, a corrective action plan included relocation of certain processes closer to a lab with better controls and incidentally into another district. Safety and politics held the same pen. Local pride covered the seams. Air shows featured flyovers from NASA chase planes. Parades rolled astronauts down Main Street between marching bands. Museums sprouted Apollo rooms with cutaway models and plaques listing every contractor within 50 miles. The spectacle turned procurement into heritage. This was the moment everything clicked. Geography wasn't an afterthought. It was the operating system. A program that touched 20,000 suppliers didn't just buy parts, it bought allegiance. When budget fights came, the map lit up phones on Capitol Hill. Calls went out, votes locked, extensions passed. The rocket rose on thrust and on districts, and both were measured carefully. The pressure, Soviet budgets, and the forced choice. While committees in Washington mapped factories to districts, Moscow watched the same broadcasts and saw something else, a wallet opening. The early lead had been theirs, Sputnik, Gagarin, record after record that made the West look slow. Propaganda organs ran it hard, but prestige runs on cash, and the Soviet economy was a short blanket. Pull it up over space, expose your feet in agriculture and consumer goods. Pull it down to cover tanks and ICBMs, and your cosmonauts shiver. Inside the Kremlin, planners faced arithmetic that didn't flatter. Grain imports were rising, harvests sagged, apartment blocks needed plumbing more than parades. The Red Army wanted missiles that could survive first strike, not moon flags. Yet every American primetime clip with a gleaming Saturn segment wheeled into a high bay forced a choice: match the theater or concede the stage. Matching meant committing scarce rubles to heavy-lift dreams. Conceding meant handing the narrative to your rival and hoping your tanks spoke louder than their television. They tried to split the difference. Keep the propaganda edge with dramatic firsts. Invest in ICBMs, the strategic backbone, and build a moon booster on paper. The N1 was the chosen path, a forest of clustered engines meant to avoid the need for massive single chambers. It looked elegant in artists' renderings. In the factories, it was chaos. The Soviet industrial base wasn't set up for that kind of integration. Rival design bureaus competed instead of cooperating. The doctrinal habit of secrecy meant lessons learned in one shop stayed there. Meanwhile, something else was happening. The Americans weren't just spending, they were testing publicly, failing publicly, and fixing in view of the world. That feedback loop was a luxury the Soviets didn't allow themselves. The budget tension bled into everything. Consumer goods already lagged. Rural shortages were touchy. Military demands only grew. The leadership could fund defense parity and a space station program that directly supported reconnaissance and military applications, or it could chase a lunar spectacular that ate capacity and returned little to warfighting. Soyuz and Salyut offered more utility per ruble, orbital endurance, docking practice, surveillance platform. A moon landing, by contrast, was a milestone that didn't spin off as much for the Red Army. The Americans had designed a fiscal trap and the trap's teeth were deadlines and network television. On paper, the N1 moved. On launch pads, it didn't. In 4 attempts, the rocket failed before reaching orbit, one exploding so violently it turned the pad into a scrapyard. Each failure cost money, parts, and faith. Worse, the failures revealed structural problems, inadequate ground testing because test stands that could simulate full engine clusters were never built, a turbine design prone to catastrophic oscillation, sensor wiring vulnerable to vibration. These are fixable if you have time and a tolerant budget. The Soviet program had neither. Behind the failures sat an economic system strained by the simplest complaints, a line for meat, a delay for boots, while the United States made the moon a weekly TV serial with spotless control rooms and smiling families. From their perspective, Soviet engineers were heroes working with blunt tools. They improvised. They balanced competing bosses, each guarding turf. They fought for test time, for better metallurgy, for a line item that didn't vanish at the next 5-year plan review. The political pressure to catch up without spending like the Americans produced compromises that made failure more likely.